Joe mentioned, I'm Beth Privitera. I do work at HS Design. We have a booth right over there, so please visit it. I am responsible for the human factors and research that goes on within our organization. We're a full product development firm. I'm also co-chair of the AMY Human Factors Committee, so a lot of what we do in that committee, writing the standards, is what you're going to see a little bit about today. So starting off, why are human factors important? It's kind of a question that comes up time and time again. And there's a couple of good reasons for it. One, which is that it's making sure that the user's behavior is consistent, that the operating of the device is consistent with their expectations, and that we make sure that we can actually use the device. I think, though, what's more important is that it's required. And that's really what's driving a lot of the methods, the impetus to employ human factors within our design process. There are guidance straight from the agency, from the FDA. The FDA participates on the Human Factors Committee for AMY. And then in Europe, our European counterparts are also coming away with some human factors guidance. So it's not a topic that can be ignored. In the past, safety and efficacy were always what were driving agency guidelines. Now it's usability, and it's been that way increasingly so since about the year 2000, when the Institute of Medicine put out an article called "To Err is Human." So you can see all of the standards that we have there within the organization. This is just a listing of that. There's IEC 62366, which is commonly referred to. That is an international standard. HE75 is the only human factors in design standard that exists. And the rest of them are all essentially best practices and guidances towards applying human factors. And then we go to Europe, and we have increasing regulations in Europe. So what I want to do today is break down what does that mean. Those are great, those are standards, those are numbers, but how do I what does that look like in our design process, and how do I bring it into the design process so that it's not an afterthought? So this is coming out of the TAR 59. It's a roadmap for human factors activities. This is a great technical information report that actually goes through each one of the phases of your design process, and it indicates what human factors activities should be done at what point in time. We increasingly get clients that come to us at the end of their design process, and they say, hey, can you run a summative usability study or a validation study at the end to go as part of the 510K? And they may or may not have spoken to users, they may not have a plan, and we've got to figure out how we're going to incorporate it and get through agency requirements. I was a little bit shocked and surprised to see that in some instances, the FDA will turn down your 510K application if you do not have the human factors data. Their human factors team at one point in time in the FDA was a team of about 2 people. Now it's at a team of about 6, and they're growing. In addition, if you're doing a combination product, both CDRH and CDER go through those level reviews. So you're going to have to go through 2 agencies in order to get the device approved. So this is an important chart in terms of just integrating it into our vernacular, integrating human factors, that applying and making sure that we are meeting our customer needs while we're going through that design process. So what the FDA is promoting is a cyclical application of human factors. We know that we have to do post-market analysis. That's usually kind of at the end. That's one of the least known human factors methods that we would use. It starts off typically with contextual inquiry, immersion into understanding what our user needs are, walking through concept development, doing our risk, doing our user testing, and then launching it and monitoring it in the field. Now you might think, why would I want to monitor it in the field? Little shifts, little changes, even if you had a product that has a kit, and the kit has a scalpel. If I change the scalpel, will there be a mistake? It's actually come back that if you change the interface of that scalpel, you might not be meeting the needs of that user. You may not meet those expectations. It may result in sticks. You have to do the risk analysis. So that part of it at the end is equally as important as the part of it at the beginning. So I'm going to walk through just what constitutes a human factors toolbox. What could you use in your actual processes that could help mitigate some of the risk and then also meet the agency requirements? Now, there's a lot of methods out there. Human factors in and of itself is a complete and entire discipline. You can get a degree in it. You can get a doctorate level degree in human factors. And there's a lot of different methods. And what we have broken down here are methods that give you insights, methods that help you iterate and design, and then methods that prove that design. So if you think about that first chart that I showed from TAR 59, that is the process that we walk through. This is just taking the human factors methods and bringing it to a way that you understand what each one of those techniques can be used for. So starting off, I'm going to walk through each one of them. The first one is contextual inquiry. This is a systematic method of going and observing users in their daily practice. What do they currently do? How do they currently behave? I equate it to this. If I was to design the next generation car, I know that no matter what I did in changing it, the gas pedal is going to be on the right, the brake is going to be on the left. If I make that fundamental shift in those two controls, I'm going to have a problem. So we want to identify what are those fundamental tenets and the disciplines of our users. If they're a cardiac surgeon, even if they're a patient user, what are their common behaviors and common understandings of how their world works so that we can design the device appropriately. So it's a systematic method of understanding what are the stakeholders. Going from stakeholders all the way from primary users to secondary users, the hospital, because again, you want to make sure that you're adding value from your product use, and all of those stakeholders that are involved. So breaking down into the users into their tasks, understanding what their role is within using a particular product, and this is especially true with complex systems, systems where augmented reality start to come into play, systems where they're the first in kind. If I understand each one of the users, then I can design for them and I can mitigate some of the issues that would come down the road. A typical deliverable looks like this. It's a map. It can be interactive. But that keeps the evidence. We're very evidence-based, evidence research, so that you understand what those users are doing, and you can use that, keep that in the forefront of your mind to go back and say, the users do this, therefore I need to design the device like this. We also take and do competitive ergonomic analysis. So looking for causality is really what we're after. So we know that sometimes when we are describing an experience, things feel differently. This feels like that. This feels better than this. And we have to ask ourselves, why does that feel the way that it does? Now, you can go to human factors literature and you can learn and discover that my finger is very, very sensitive and I can pick up 0.3 microns as I go across. So if I use a touch screen, I can feel when there's dirt on that touch screen, right? So our hands are super, super sensitive. What constitutes a good insertion of a needle? What constitutes a good, useful catheter as it's inserted? With catheter interventions, all I can do is twist one direction, another direction is push and pull. So when it comes to things like manufacturing flash, then that can become a disruption. That can become an interruption that actually truly impacts my human factors and the overall usability of the device. In this particular instance, the nurse didn't want to use the gray microintroducer. They wanted to use the white one, and all it was because there's a little bit of flash on there. So understanding causality and what that means, looking at the product design and why they're making those decisions, something that's very, very important in the application of human factors. A heuristic evaluation, another technique. This technique is often done, it essentially means an expert review. It's often done if we haven't done any human factors prior to putting together our summative study. We can take it and we can say, well, where are we in design and how can we improve the usability? It might be just done as an evaluation of the design, evaluation of software, evaluation of hardware, that can give you the best error prevention. So again, how do I prevent the users from doing the wrong thing and promote them doing the right thing? We can go back to the standards, looking at visual design, whether or not they're going to be tolerant to that, what type of data, information, clinical decision-making they may be making. All of that information can be discovered through a heuristic evaluation. Another fundamental, this practice, doing a task analysis, is actually promoted by the FDA. It's in the FDA's guidance right now. This is the fundamental human factors tool that everyone uses in pretty much every single product design when they go to submit their dossier. And it's sort of the backbone, it's the spine, and it breaks it down, each one of the steps. You break it down into perception, cognition, and action. So perception, meaning my sensory perception, how does it feel? Again, what feedback do I get it? My cognition, what do I need to think about in regards to that product? Do I need to keep information in my head in order to use it? Am I remembering something? And then action, what do I need to do as a result of the inputs that I'm getting from that device? Do I need to push a button? Does the action require excessive biomechanics? And then giving insights. Another consideration on doing a task analysis, is there a mitigating environmental condition that may make it more or less challenging? So for example, is the room dark? So I should change the way that the display is. So on and so forth, we can discover from task analysis. One that's often overlooked in applying human factors is just making sure that the device fits our appropriate user. So a lot of people will take and they'll measure. They'll get it so that anthropometry just stands for the measure of man, Biomechanics, that's how we move ourselves in space. This is an important point in that we need to make sure that the device is appropriately sized for ourselves. Now that becomes a really challenging situation when you look at the population and the challenges of population growth. We're getting larger, we're not getting smaller. So that's one that we must continue up with the data. If we're designing a hand tool, things are pretty well standardized in that arena. But when we get to some of the other newer devices where you're walking in, they're more immersive in terms of things that are around our bodies, we have to look a little bit deeper in it. The other part of that, when it comes to biomechanics, if I just did anthropometry, every product would be designed for me to stand like this. Because this is the neutral position, and I would just do this. And I would optimize all designs to be like that. But we're actually meant to move. We're actually meant to move through space. And every time we move, then we can change our force production in our hands. So taking a look at it from this is the actions that the user needs to do as they're manipulating a device. Can help in that overall acceptability. The reality is that our physicians, our surgeons in particular, after they go through their day-to-day job, they don't have the opportunity that we have, where if we have a problem that we can't solve, we say, okay, I'm going to table that, I'm going to walk away. Our surgeons don't. They will contort themselves, they will figure out a way, they will gather friends, they will fire staplers on behalf of one another in order to meet those goals. So paying attention to the anthropometry, the biomechanics, is sort of a foundational platform for the application of human factors. And that gets to the physical and sensory characteristics. So what do I need in terms of my ability to see, to understand? Are things going to align? If I'm going to insert a tray into something, do they naturally align? I know that I have a microwave that you push a button and the door opens and then I put stuff down, and it's sort of strange to have it down low under my counter versus up high. And just the change in that visualization and the visual field changes your ability to target things, and that's what you're getting at when you take a look at those physical and sensory capabilities. Can I target it? Can I clean it appropriately? I am positive that the top of my microwave is much dirtier now that it is beneath the counter than it was when it was at the top, because we all know that when we open up the door of a microwave, we hate looking at the gook. So you can think about it in that way. How do I make it easier for everyone in that life cycle to do the jobs that they need to do? And the design factors and the design decisions as a result can impact our overall usability. Again, when you think about perception and cognition, there's a little bit of lack of understanding in regards to what does that really mean? What those words are really truly saying? The FDA very clear again on the definition. Perception is the ability to detect, identify, and recognize sensory input. Cognition refers to higher level mental phenomena. So what do I need to remember, and then what do I need to do about it? Expectancies, we all have them. That's just a natural thing that we do. We naturally judge upon first sight. And we have predisposed situations that we're going to expect. So if it's a diabetic device that I'm going to hit with I'm going to have to insert a needle, I'm going to have the expectation that that's going to hurt. When we do drug delivery devices, we've been faced with a drug delivery device that's going into someone's leg that makes a loud pop. What do you do when you have a loud pop? You jump. Well, if the needle needed to stay in your leg, it's not going to. It's not going to stay in that subdermal because of that loud noise. So thinking through what are the expectations, what are our reactions to situations can help improve and apply those ergonomics early. So we take all of these user needs that we have and all of the different techniques, and this document, the user needs specification, becomes the most important document. So how many of you here have come away with a user need that says it must be easy to use? How many? Everyone admit, that's like the first thing your marketing people say, it must be easy to use. Now, in your testing, can you test easy to use? You cannot. There's no way. It's sort of like saying that I love you level 10, not 5, not 20, not 30, it's 10. My easiness is also the same way. It's an arbitrary number. So what you have to do is you have to break that down into what constitutes ease of use and find those opportunities to measure within in order to identify an appropriate usability testing plan. So this document is sort of overlooked a lot when it comes to the human factors, but it should be separated into what are those user needs, because that's going to drive the subsequent testing. Use risk analysis, user FMEA. These are fundamentals, again, part of your risk analysis that you're already doing. Add on there, what is the user? So the user is probably your loose cannon that's in the room. You don't really know how they're going to use your device. They can do whatever they want. So in some instances, we want them to because we're doing off-label use. That happens every day. we need to look at what that risk analysis, what is the risk of them doing the different tasks, coming up with a scale, breaking it down, coming up with the way that that can be measured, and it looks like this. When we're all done, you have the task, again, built off of our task analysis, and we go through and we identify what the risk. Now, a little known fact down here at the bottom is use risk is assessed twice. According to the FDA guidance, they want you to do it before you do your summative, and then if you have any critical tasks that you failed at or the user struggled with, they want you to go back in and say, is there any residual risk as a result? Did you mitigate the risk enough in order to release the product? And then when it comes to preparing the report, so this is just a brief outline of the differences between an international submission and a national submission. You can see that pretty much the contents are exactly the same, they're just presented in a different order. And the one caveat being that for our FDA, you must use United States citizens. You cannot do your testing in another country and bring it to the United States. It must be done on our soil. It must be done with using our citizens. And what's interesting, when I talk to my European counterparts, it seems to be that our FDA is driving a lot of those standards and a lot of those rules. And I have not heard the reverse of that. So when it comes to putting together an international submission, I believe to date, you can use United States. So if you did the testing in the United States, you do not need to go and repeat that testing for European citizens because they have not said that they will do that. So that might change with the new directives. It's a little bit unknown, and as more and more mandates come out in regards to human factors, that might change as well. So watch that space. But for right now, you're good with doing it in the United States. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a case study very quickly. This is just a handheld consumer medical device, a little bit about our process. This particular device is a drug-free delivery. It's to treat migraines. So what did we do? We conducted one-on-one interviews to understand migraines, understand how people treat their symptoms. Again, this competitive device is Motrin, is ibuprofen. It's a drug, and we're trying to use a device instead of a drug. So we're able to hear the pain points. That was a literal kind of a joke if you think about headache users. What are they really doing? How much dexterity do they have when they're in this situation? What are their overall condition situations? And then started to generate probes. So just having a conversation, we know that people don't necessarily communicate design language to us. So we developed a set of probes to engage them in the conversation. So in order to understand further what they're going to accept, not accept, what they're going to view as something that is a usable device, something that they want to use, then our design team comes up with probes to ask questions differently. If someone were to ask me my ideal car, I'd say I don't have one. I magically poof myself everywhere, just magically go somewhere. That doesn't actually help you design a car. So when you have interviews, when you have that, it's a good starting point, but getting probes, something to engage the conversation a little bit further, can be very, very helpful in terms of getting the right design. We used the design standards as a foundational guide. So one of the things that we did, so going back to the anthropometry and the biomechanics, we're looking at how big is the 50th percentile female hands versus the male hands versus their necks versus how they're going to use the particular device, and develop a theory of operation from that viewpoint, from that standpoint, so that all of the forms that are generated, all the product architectures, are considered as fundamental with the anthropometry and the biomechanics. Then we created preliminary foam models, again, to inform our users, giving them the ability to mix and match. So you have this user interface with this product architecture. This is especially true in a consumer world where you could have anything that you want. How do I narrow it down so that the selection is not so overcoming that I can't actually move forward in that design? And lastly, then doing the subsequent usability refinements in the testing. So this is, again, it's required. Using this information to then generate our design improvements. So making sure that initial formative usability studies are generating the design improvements. Now, the regulations are very open on those formative studies. It doesn't tell you that you need to do a specific number of users. It doesn't tell you how to do it. It's very, very open. And I really like that, and I'm very grateful for that. The reason for that is, if I get 6 users that all hate it, I don't need to do a 7th one to tell me the same thing. No, I make my design changes and then I move on. So a little bit of flexibility there. And then at the end, with the summative, then of course you're doing a much more rigorous study, a lot tighter control. The key takeaways is that the users were sensitive to screen brightness. So some of the things that we didn't actually anticipate in our design, we weren't really thinking about because we weren't thinking in their particular conditions. So screen brightness, the ability to read small print. I know I'm getting up there in age, so my ability to read small print's already waning, so having a headache while doing it made it that much more challenging. So then we made design modifications from there. So overall, very, very quick and successful program built on taking a look at what the user's needs were from the beginning, applying good anthropometry biomechanics, and then complete user testing at the end. So some of the key takeaways that I hope to share with you today is that applying human factors not only is an agency requirement, but typically it's a fundamental customer requirement, and that every design problem is going to be a little bit different. It's going to vary across the board in terms of what exactly you need to test, what exactly you need to design when it comes to importing into a strong human factors program. And that you should consider a couple of bullet points. That the human factors, if you are approaching it in the right mindset, it can actually drive your product architecture. It can ultimately mitigate some of the use risk. And then you can expedite your usability studies if I apply those standards within that process. So that's it, really, and I appreciate the time of letting me share this information with you, and happy to answer any questions.